It's a good way to start the morning.
It's always a good way to start.
Fantastic. So, so that was good. So yeah, we are constantly updating and improving, right, Ryan? That is our
See,
theme, right?
always, you got to
Always.
always improve. Wow,
There
look
you
at that.
go.
I'm almost at 6 years, 5 years, 10 months on my own now.
There you go. So for those of you who are joining us now and kind of getting in on, like, we were kind of laughing because I jumped over to Ryan's LinkedIn page so I can give him a more formal introduction, and I found his picture to be a little outdated, which would be an understatement. So he has since changed it, but we were having a good laugh about some of the information that was available there. So without further ado, as people are coming in, we'll get into the introductions here and tell you guys how this is going to work and get into the meat of it, which is really hopefully trying to save you money on what is the second largest part of your mortgage payment. If you have a PITI payment, principal, interest, taxes, and insurance, then the big part is your real estate taxes, and taxes in the state of Illinois are, I believe, still only the second highest in the nation. Is that where we're at, Ryan? Still, we're fighting for number one.
It's a tough fight. I'm never sure where we land, but
Yeah,
we're
okay.
up there.
So we're up there. So, all right. So we have with us Ryan Schaefges. Ryan, oh, before I get into that, there's a chat box, and Tony will put some information in a chat box to connect. This is how you guys communicate with us. This is an interactive thing. If you have questions, we will stop and answer your questions. Ryan is fantastic at what he does. Found him a couple of years ago. I think this is our third presentation that we're doing, and Ryan actually handles tax appeals in the entire state and commercial and residential. So one of the challenges I always found with working with tax appeal attorneys is that, well, I only do Cook County. Well, I only do commercial. Well, I only do Lake County. So Ryan's kind of covers the state. So we certainly enjoy the relationship there. I'm going to give you a brief background on Ryan. He graduated the University of Illinois Chicago School of Law, formerly known as John Marshall. So that's where he's got his degree, and been in, let's see, self-employed for himself just under 6 years in specializing in tax appeals. Myself, Rich Kimball with Cross Country Mortgage. If you're invited here, you probably know who I am, so we won't spend a lot of time on that. I'm going to basically be the moderator here, and as you guys ask questions in the chat box, which I'm going to open up, perfect. As you guys ask questions in the chat box as we go, I'm going to get those questions out to Ryan. In the meantime, Ryan, everybody wants to know, how do I save money on my property tax bill? But first, how do I even read a property tax bill? I turn it over to you.
That's a very good question. Actually, just understanding the property tax bill is always the most fun and difficult part. So I'm gonna start the screen share for this one. Let's share that, I believe is the proper thing to share. Can we see it?
We can. We are live. We're good. Yep.
Perfect. All right. Just do this.
Move a couple things over. Get my
And
chat box going.
Yeah, exactly. Me too.
Nice.
And all right, so I'm Ryan Schaefges. Thanks for the introduction, Rich. I'm an attorney. I focus my practice on property tax appeals, and I work on, like you said, any property anywhere in the state of Illinois. If you have any questions at all in the presentation, feel free to ask them. Happy to answer them on the spot. Property taxes are a bit confusing, and they're not at all the most straightforward thing to understand. So I try to go through and make sure we're all on the same page on what the tax bill is, what it's made of, and what you can fight in those taxes. So the first thing I always start off with in Illinois, the most basic thing, is that we pay taxes in arrears. So this year in 2022, we are paying property taxes for the 2021 assessment and the 2021 tax year. So we're paying last year's tax bill this year. And in Cook County, we pay in 2 installments. And the first installment always comes out early in the year, comes out usually around February. Early February, gets paid early March. And that is mathematical bill. It's not actually a calculated bill. They don't figure out what your tax liability is. They take the prior year's bill and they take 55% of that. And that's what your first installment is in Cook County. So it actually has nothing to do with your exemptions, with your reassessment or anything like that. Cook County does that because they are slower to finalize all their assessments, and it gives them an extra bit of time to get their second installments where they actually make the calculations out. Speaking of second installment, that second installment usually comes out around early July, and it's paid in early, it's paid in early August. In 2022, we are a bit far behind. And as such, we're looking at the second installment to be coming out October or November for payment in November or December currently. But then what they do is they figure out what your total tax liability is, and we'll go to how they calculate that in a minute. But we figure out the tax liability, and then they subtract whatever that first payment was. So the second and first payment aren't necessarily equal, like they are in almost every other county in Illinois. Most every other county is 2 equal installments billed as a whole in May, usually due in June and September, give or take a little bit. And that's how most of the other counties. So if you're in Lake, if you're in DuPage, Will, McHenry, any of those other counties, that's more what your tax bill is going to look like.
So Ryan, on this, just go back to Cook County. So just a notice to everybody, that second bill for sure is going to be late. And it looks like we'll probably cut into somebody's Christmas budget, because it's going to be due, what, November, December. So that's a little rough.
Best case right now. Yeah, we're still in the process of finalizing those valuations, and that process still has at least a couple months to go. And then after that's done, they have to calculate everything and, you know, get the budgets from everybody. So we're looking around November, December for those payments. So if you don't escrow your taxes, just keep in mind you're not going to be paying in August like normal, and make sure you save that money, because you're going to have a payment possibly in December and then another one due in early March. So just keep that in mind.
And you didn't, and what was the reason that they missed their deadline this year?
So the Cook County assessor is attempting to do a lot of structural changes. They're trying to address a lot of problems in the assessment system. And in doing so, it's an uphill battle, and it takes a lot of time. And it seems like whatever happened this year they were reassessing the city of Chicago for the first time. And that reassessment just took them longer than they anticipated. And that was really it. The assessor is normally finished with their assessments for the year around September or October, the latest. And the assessor last year didn't finish until literally like 3 months ago. Wow. And at this point, they haven't even started the 2022 assessment process. So I'm worried it's going to compound on itself and just continue to be late, because we are starting this process significantly later. But this is the second time the new assessors reassessed the area that they're reassessing now. So hopefully it won't go as late this time. We'll see.
Appreciate that explanation.
So going back to now your bill is made up of 4 parts primarily. The parts are the assessed value, which is the basis of everything. Then there's the equalization factor. That number, it changes every year, give or take around 3 in Cook County. Again, that's nothing to really concern yourself with. It's going to affect everybody equally. Then there's your local tax rate. And then on your property, any exemptions are the final thing. So those are all calculated in Cook County. And this is a copy of a second installment bill, which shows that full calculation. And again, it shows taking the total bill and subtracting whatever was paid in that first installment to arrive at a second installment payment. And in this case, you'll notice the second installment payment is $500 higher than the first. So that's where you can get a lot of variance in your payments, to keep that in mind. This is an example of a DuPage bill, or this is at least what kind of it looks like. The assessment's a little different because the state equalization factor in DuPage almost all the time is around 1.0. And so it's a lot different. The assessed values are higher, and then your tax rates and your equalization change a bit. But the exemptions are the same. They show up there as well, and they come off the bill at the end. Here's an example of a Will County. This is a bill with no exemptions. Again, assessed value. There's no exemptions on this one. There's your tax rate, and Will County's multiplier is also 1. Most counties outside of Cook County kind of have a different system with that equalization factor. In this case, there were no exemptions on this property. This wasn't an owner-occupied property for a house. So that's just an example, again, of how all the bills can be a little bit different, but it's important to understand the basis of it, because the basis is that assessed value, and that's the number we fight. In Cook County, if you want to lower your taxes and reduce your assessed value, you can appeal that. The assessed value is the base of your tax bill, and it's tied to the market value of your house. In Cook County, it is in theory around 10% of the current market value, and all the other counties, it's around 33.33% of the current market value. This is your number that you should appeal, because you can save money. The lower it is, the lower your tax liability is. And now, just as a quick overview and an assessment as a homeowner, if you're in Cook County and you have a $30,000 assessed value, that says your house is $300,000 according to the assessor. In all the other counties, if you have a $100,000 assessed value, that's a $300,000 house according to the assessor. And that's just a good note too, for if you're looking at buying or selling, you can compare quickly your assessment to what the current asking of your house is going to be, or what you're looking at paying for a house, or what you're looking at listing for a house, to see if you should be appealing your taxes already based on market value, or if when you buy that house, you might be able to lower those taxes right away once you get into it.
So let me ask you a couple things about that. So if you want to stay in that slide for a second. So let's say I'm buying a house in McHenry County. And let's say in McHenry, I purchased my house for, I don't know, $290 in the example that you have here. I'm walking into it knowing I have a $100,000 assessed value. So that extra $10,000, am I able to take my closing disclosure from my closing into the assessor's office and say, hey, I paid this much. I paid $290. You guys think it's worth $310. Is it that easy?
So if it's a single family home and it was an arm's length sale, and by that I mean listed on the MLS, brokers' commissions were paid, and you're unrelated parties, if it is true, just absolute cut and dry arm's length, and your assessment is above what you just paid, yes, it can be actually that easy. And it's nice. That's good for the first year in most counties. So most places will let you do that one time, and then afterwards that no longer will hold much. Some, it depends. If you close in December, maybe get away from it 2 years in some counties. I know Lake County has a rule. They'll go back for 1 year calendar wise, and that's it. So if you're in 2022, if the sale was January to December of 21, that's a great thing to do. Otherwise, you got to appeal it, because they will make you argue it. And by that, I mean, you have to formally appeal it. When you're talking about going to the assessor, absolutely, you can do that. And every assessor is a little different, and how that process will actually break down. But give or take, something like that is recommended and the exact correct thing to do. Now, on the other hand, if it's assessed at $300,000 and you paid $380 for it, which is happening a lot in this market where we've gone up for 2 or 3 years at pretty decent rates in a row, then just don't appeal that. I would highly recommend not bringing that up to the assessor. Most of the assessors would just point that out. Most of the assessors are spectacular. They just point it out and say, actually, you're assessed here, you paid this. I would recommend you don't do anything, because if we did anything, we would increase it to the assessment, and they would gently tell you to go the other way. But there are some counties, if you go into them and you file a formal appeal, despite that, they will increase your assessment. So it can be, you have to be cautious about it and make sure. That's why it's good to check. But absolutely, it is almost as simple as that in some areas. And again, for the first year is it's a great thing to do, and I highly recommend that.
All right.
The next part of your bill is your tax rate, and this varies significantly by county and township and everything where you are, but there's a rough breakdown. This is one in Schaumburg. The school is 66%. Your school is the majority of your tax bill in almost every county and township. And that's the biggest part. You don't really have control over that, but that's, we can kind of just cruise. That's a number you don't really have to pay attention to, but it's good to note where that breakdown is: your village, your township, the county, fire, police, all that sort of stuff. But most of it, like I said, goes directly to your school districts. The next are the exemptions, and this is super important to pay attention to, because throughout Illinois, there are tons of people who do not have the appropriate exemptions. And what I mean is, these are things that are removed from your tax bill, where Illinois has stated, if you meet certain criteria, we'll give you a break on your property taxes. And that criteria varies heavily, but the most notable is the homeowner's exemption, which is if you live in a property and you own that property, that's it. Then if it's your primary residence, you live there and you pay the taxes, then you get an exemption, and that comes off your tax bill. If you're not getting that exemption, it's a very good thing to notice, because you can, in some counties, get the current bill you're paying fixed, and in Cook County, you can even go backwards to get prior year's exemptions that were missed applied to your house.
What's that exemption typically worth?
So in Cook County, it is 10,000 equalized assessed value. In that varies by tax rate. So if your tax rate in that example I showed, it was Schaumburg, their tax rate's like about 9-10%. It's about a 900 or 1,000 exemption. There are certain areas of Cook County where the tax rate's 6 or 7%, so it's about a $600 or $700 exemption. And there are places in South and Southwest Cook County where you can have 15 to 35% tax rates, and those exemptions can be $2,000 or $3,000. But
great.
it's an assessed value. It's an equalized assessed value. And in the collar counties, everywhere outside of Cook, it's typically $400 to $700. It's actually a little less outside of Cook County, and that's just a minor difference. But the exemptions in Cook County, almost all of them are bigger than exemptions outside of Cook County. The other exemptions to note and to consider are a senior exemption. If you meet the homestead exemption plus you're 65 years old, they'll give you an extra break. Now, if you meet the homestead exemption and you're 65 years old and you have an income under $65,000 a year, then you have the ability to freeze your assessed value, which locks in that assessed value part. And no matter what happens, prices can skyrocket, assessments can go up, your taxes will be much more manageable and consistent. I've seen clients with senior freezes $4,000, $5,000, $6,000 a year coming off their tax bill to that.
Is that senior freeze, that's just Cook County, or is that all the counties?
All the counties have a senior freeze. They're all income capped. They all have the same requirements. It's own it, pay the taxes, be 65, and then have an income of $65,000 a year or less. And that's a household income. So if you're a senior living with adult children who also have an income, then you may not qualify, because it considers Social Security, pensions, plus if you have an adult child making the money too, it considers all that if they're living there as their primary residence. Disability is another exemption. If you have a disability, it's a small exemption, but we're talking $100 to $300, depending on where you are. It's not a very big exemption. And then the next exemption is the veterans exemption. There's an exemption for returning veterans recently on active duty. There's a small exemption there. And then there are service-related disabilities. So if you're a veteran with a service-related disability, there can be significant exemptions to the point of a complete exemption on your property taxes up to a value of $700,000 or $800,000 of a house, depending on where you are. And that exemption can be almost complete if you're, I think it's over 70% disabled per the VA. Pardon me one second.
All right, so we've got, my timing was good. I put a question out there if anybody had any questions, and Gwen has a question. Ryan, with the senior freeze, I have a 2 flat. So do they count the rent as part of the 65,000?
So Gwen, that's a great question. The rent typically is reportable income, and it would be considered in the $65,000 analysis. That is stuff that you, assuming you're the owner and you're the one taking the rent, that's reportable income, and it should be considered in that 65K. So you'd add that rent into your whatever, your Social Security, your pension, retirement, any required minimum distributions and stuff like that. So yeah, it definitely would count.
Great question.
The next is a good note. The Cook County has gone out to ensure that the taxes are renewed, the assessment or the exemptions are renewed automatically. With COVID, there were issues with a lot of exemptions falling off and people not getting stuff. And this new assessor wanted to try to make sure everyone's exemptions automatically renewed. You can check for Cook and every other county, you can check your exemptions at any point online, and you can always call your assessor as well. And it's always important to figure out what exemptions are reflected on your bill and make sure you're getting the ones you're entitled to. Because outside of Cook County, where you can go back 2 or 3 years, you can't really go back anything past the current year. So if you get your bill in DuPage County and you notice that you didn't have a homestead exemption, you could call them up. Right now is a perfect time for that, because the bills come out, but the second installment bill has not been paid and it's not due yet. So if you call and you're in any of those counties and you don't have an exemption, most of them will issue a certificate of error for the 2021 assessment, which will lower the tax bill, your second installment tax bill this year, and save you money coming up in September. I've actually had several clients where I've had that exact scenario happen, where we've been able to save them some money.
Ryan, I've got another question from Catherine. She said, what is the site to check online?
That's a great question. And the answer is, what county do you live in? Because the site to check varies by the county, but you can go on the Cook County Treasurer's website or the Cook County Assessor's website, look up your parcel, your property, and you can check for exemptions there. If you're in DuPage, look up DuPage County Assessor. There's a website there. If you're looking at Lake County, same thing. It's usually the best is Google your county assessor and or property lookup or something like that. Look up your property, and most places like Lake County, you can just pull up your property record card and they have every bit of data on there. Same with DuPage and Will County. They will note what exemptions are reflected and what aren't. So that's a great way to check. If you Tony just linked the Cook County Assessor's website, and you can look up there under the property search, and once you find your parcel, type in either the parcel ID number, the PIN, or the your address, search your property. When you pull it up, there's a spot on the bottom that actually shows the exemptions you've been receiving on there, and it reflects them. So that's a great way to check. If you haven't been receiving those, there's a process to fill out on that website. You can apply online. You need certain information, copy of your ID and stuff like that, and sign in an affidavit, but you can actually fix that on that same website in Cook County. They have an online process for all of that.
Yep, and Tony's got the site in the chat for everybody. So thank you very much, Tony. That was awesome. All right, so got a map. What's with the map, Ryan?
Well, this is the assessment cycle. In Cook County, we're talking about how there was a bit of an issue with Chicago last year. They were still assessing the city of Chicago. It took them a long time. That's a map of Cook County, and there's 3 colors on it. The pink is the north and northwest suburbs. The green, bright green, is the city of Chicago proper, and then the lighter greenish is the south and southwest suburbs. And that's actually how Cook County breaks down their assessment cycle. So last year in 2021, they were assessing the city of Chicago. It took them a long time, and they when they finished it, like I said, that's kind of what caused the delay. Now this year, every year they have to reassess properties because there's so many properties in Cook County. So this year they're working in 2022 on the pink area again. Every year this cycle resets every 3 years. in your area, and every year in Cook County, one chunk is getting reassessed. And that is always the best time to review your assessment, because that's when your assessment changes the most. Now, this is a Cook County map. The rest of the map is really easy because it's the picture of the state outside of Cook County, and they get mostly reassessed on a 4-year period, with 2023 next year being the next time they'll be reassessed. When your property is reassessed, it's really important to look at that, because that's the most time that's the time when most of any change happens. Your assessment can change significantly. I had clients in Chicago this year whose assessments went down, and I was like, well, look at that. Great for you. I had clients in Cook County whose assessments went up by 250%. And so it's important to pay attention to that. If you're looking at a $10,000 tax bill and you don't notice that your tax bill just got increased significantly and could be $20,000 next year, that's going to come as a significant surprise. And it's important to note that those types of extreme changes only happen, not only, but almost only happen in reassessment cycles. So it's important to look at those years. It can still happen in you can still appeal in non-reassessment years, and you can appeal successfully several years in a row. And that's also because circumstances change every year. People are buying and selling properties, markets change, as well as the assessments of your neighboring properties will also change. So it's important to look every year at your assessment to see if there is anything you can do to lower it. And again, the lower the assessment, the lower your tax bill, the more you save. The question I get often is, why should you appeal your taxes? And the thing I say, obviously, is you save money. In Cook County, there are over 1.8 million parcels. I think 1.3-ish. These numbers might be a little off, but again, there's a significant amount of residential parcels, and the assessor has to reassess 1/3 of these every year. And again, they make mistakes, and they know they do, and that's why they put these processes into place. So they can't look at a single house. When you're talking about hey, I just bought my house for this, and going to the assessor, you can do that, but they almost never have the time or manpower to do that on their own. They can't just be like, let's evaluate this sale without the person, bringing it up and say, oh, is this an arm's length sale? Is this valid for the assessment? Should we apply this to this person's assessment? Yes or no? They don't do that unless you show them and encourage them to do so. And they do make mistakes. I had clients where they were assessed one client was assessed as a 5,200 square foot house, and just kind of went with it and always assumed that the assessment included his basement. And then I was like, no, it should not include your basement. We found this out. We pointed this out. It actually happened when this client was selling their property. Their realtor noticed it, and they're like, do they count basements in square footage? Because this is about the square footages. And well, they don't. Even if it's a walkout basement, it is a below grade square footage is counted separately than above grade. We had a client, we were able to reduce his taxes by almost $7,000 because of that. He was paying $22,000 and his tax bill was $15,000 afterwards. And that was just because the assessor was charging him on a house that was 40% bigger than it was.
And I'd ask anybody listening, do they think, anybody listening here with us, do they think that their house is overassessed? And if they do think that, put it in the chat why they think their house is overassessed.
That is a great thing to see, because a lot of houses can be overassessed for a ton of different reasons. And this client didn't even realize it. They just kind of grumbled about their taxes. And until their broker pointed it out, the realtor said, this seems too much. And then I got involved, and it's amazing what can happen sometimes if you don't ever think about it or look at it. So
well, and that's a good point, Ryan, too. I wanted to add that I know some of our guests today and our viewers are actually realtors, and if you're about to list a home and you actually see, holy cow, this thing is just way out of whack, Ryan would be a great source to go talk to, get his professional advice, and then obviously you can let future buyers know, hey, we believe this is overassessed. These are the facts. We do believe it's going to come in here, based on this information. So let's see here. So Catherine asks, and I'll just confirm, yes, Catherine, basement square footage is not to be included in your assessed value. That is correct.
So in the characteristics of whatever you're looking at, when you see square footage, so if you go to like Cook County Assessor and you look at their square footage, what that should represent is the above ground square footage. That should not represent basement square footage, should not include garage square footage. That's one of the most important characteristics, not the most, but it's one of like the top 3 characteristics of your house is your square footage, because that's the size of the house. Basements, garages, even an enclosed porch is not, like, if it's not fully conditioned, air and heat and stuff, those shouldn't be included in square footage. I had a client once who had an enclosed porch that was like 300 square feet, and it was being added to their square footage. And that was just because the assessor just hadn't noticed. They saw a permit, square footage change. They didn't realize it was for a porch versus actual conditioned living space. And, with a foundation as opposed to just like a deck, it was interesting. And again, there's a lot of layers of government, and they make some mistakes sometimes.
So Ryan, I know on Cook County, you could find the square footage for a property. If you go into the assessor's website, look up your own property. What about, would I be able to find that in the collar counties as well online?
So depending on the township, in Lake County, they have a very robust website for all property information, and you have access to everything, and you can find out above ground square footage, basement square footage. You can find everything out in Lake County. In DuPage County, go to your township assessor. Each township assessor, you're in Downers Grove Township, go to Downers Grove Township Assessor, and their website, again, is quite robust. And if you search up your property by address or PIN, you'll be able to find the characteristics of your property, including square footage.
And here's a common mistake that I see made all the time. Raised ranches are notorious for having that lower level included in the square foot. And many, many, many raised ranches are below grade, even if it's a foot. When I say below grade, that means the dirt is actually exceeding the floor level. So if the dirt outside of the property is exceeding the floor level, then that property is technically considered below grade. They're at least that floor, I should say, is considered below grade. So in a lot of raised ranches, really your square footage is when you walk in the front door and go up, it's just that top floor.
That's
so if you're
absolutely correct.
Yeah, if you're being assessed for when you go down those stairs in that section and it's below grade, that would be something to take up with the assessor's office to say, hey, the livable square footage or the taxable square footage is upstairs. So.
And that's exactly it. I had a client recently who had a raised ranch that was 1,200 square feet on each floor, give or take. So it was like 1,200, 2,400. We go and look, and it's a 2,400 square foot house. And I go through the facts when I onboard a client. When I take anyone on his questions, I always review the facts of their property to make sure that we're on the same page, right? And I asked this client, okay, so you got a house X years, this, and it's about 2,400 square feet. And they're like, yeah, it sounds about right, if you include the downstairs too. And I was like, well, what kind of house is it? And they said it's a raised ranch. And I was like, well, you shouldn't be including the downstairs. And that exact problem, we're actually still in the process of addressing that. We'll see what happens, but that's a problem that definitely can happen. For homeowners, you can appeal your 2022 property taxes for next year's bills, basically starting right now at your county's Board of Review. Cook County's assessor has a formal process for 2022 where we can still appeal, and the Board of Review will be available to appeal later this year as well.
God bless you.
Thank you. Those reductions, if you get a reduction this year on an appeal this year, it shows up on your bill next year. And that's due to us paying taxes in arrears. And that's important to note, because when you have an appeal and you have a bill pending, you're like, am I appealing this? Why didn't it lower? You don't lower the bill you have. you lower your future bills. And that's important to note because, again, it's just, you'll get frustrated if you're looking at a bill and you want to lower it and you appeal it and you get some success, and then you have to realize you have to wait a year before you actually see that success. So it's important to note. And in Cook County, those savings aren't reflected until the second installment comes out, because again, that's where they calculate the actual tax bill as opposed to the first installment, which is just a mathematical formula. And everywhere else, any reduction is reflected on that first bill, because again, the first bill outside of Cook County is fully calculated. And then Rich brought this up earlier, but your purchase price can be a strong basis for a successful appeal. It's a very, if it was owner, if it was owner to owner, it wasn't distressed at all, and it wasn't, short sale or a foreclosure. Now, sometimes, and this isn't easy to do, you typically can't just go into the assessor, and by that I mean I don't think I've ever had the assessor okay this without an appeal. If you have, let's say, a short sale or a foreclosure, and you bought a property and there's significant damage to the property and it needs to be repaired. There was water damage that's never been repaired, and that's why the property you bought for $250,000 is actually assessed at $600,000, because it needs $200,000 of repairs and stuff like that. You can still argue that, and you should, because that value for that year may not be correct. And maybe that's just a 1-year reduction, but still you can save significant for a year. And again, for new owners, it's great. If you're looking to sell, you can verify that your facts, and you can have time to make sure that your proper exemptions are in place. Because for a seller, like I said, even right now, you can still get some back from your exemptions. And if you correct your exemption immediately and you're selling, then you can save money at closing by giving less money to the buyer, because you'll be prorating less in taxes if you're able to lower your tax bill immediately through applying the proper exemptions.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, that's a great deal. You can actually save a seller money by correcting the errors, and then they don't give as big a credit to the new buyer. That's awesome.
It can front load those savings. You can say a client right now, if they're in Lake County or DuPage County, you're selling a property and you don't have an exemption, we can get the exemption applied, which will lower your bill that you pay in September, which if you close before September will literally be a bill you pay at closing. So it'll save you money right there at your closing, and you prorate taxes for next year at your closing as well. And that'll save you money because you prorate those based on the current bill. So if we lower that current bill, you save money, and you can basically save your money right away in a closing.
So do we have a question from Denise? So she said, for confirmation, does the below area rule apply to buy, try, and quad levels? Really, it's any level that's below grade. But yes, those property styles are more apt to have levels of the home that are actually below the lawn and the outside. So yeah, those are pretty common. So it would definitely apply. Just raised ranch isn't the only one, just happens to be the more common one. But those other properties that you put in there, a bi-level, a tri-level, and a quad level, are typically going to have subterranean or levels that are actually below grade. So Gwen asks, if you live in a home for 30 years and all your data with the assessor is correct, what would you base your request on? So she's talking about maybe a request for appeal. So
that's a great question, because so far we've talked about factual mistakes and purchase prices. Well, if you've lived in a house for 30 years, obviously you didn't buy it, you can still appeal based on the market. So the market appeal can be made in 2 ways. You can get a formal appraisal. Let's say you have you took out a home equity line, wanted to do some whatever. You take out a line of credit, and there was an appraisal needed for whatever reason. They do an appraisal and they say, okay, your house is worth $300,000. We'll lend you X amount of dollars. That's fine. But now you have an appraisal. If your assessment is above that appraisal can be a strong indicator of the market value, which is one of the bases for appeals. So you can use the market through an appraisal, or you can do your own market research and say, my neighbors are selling, their houses are selling, but they're not selling like, at whatever level they have you assessed. They have you assessed at 600,000. All the houses are selling at 500,000. That's a great indicator. You have to put together a formal appeal at that, and you're basically making a market argument. And there's two main arguments to make on appeals. There's the market argument, which is, again, that's using the sales in the area. Doesn't necessarily have to be your own sale. It can be neighboring properties that are similar to you. Square footage and age are important, and location obviously as well. You want close neighbors, you want close in size and close in age. And the number to compare there is the market value per square foot. If they're selling lower than yours, it's a pretty good case to lower yours, and you can prepare an appeal based on that. The other thing that Illinois allows is equity-based appeals, and that's just saying my assessments here, my neighbor's assessments are here. We're very similar houses. That's not fair. And that's just looking at your square footage, looking at your neighbor's square footage, and then looking at your assessments and comparing them. And that's the way you can make successful appeals.
Yeah, and there's a couple other resources. I don't, before you finish that point, did you want to say something else on that, Ryan? Because I wanted to give some folks some other resources on that.
Oh, no, that's pretty much it.
So yeah, a couple of resources that you guys could also go. So like Schaumburg Township, I have one of my friends and customers that he will go in there and appeal. And I don't know if you knew this, Ryan, but they'll actually pull, they were like, oh, you're appealing? Great. And they pull the comps for them.
Oh,
And they
absolutely.
submit it.
You can
I've
go,
never
so you
seen
can
that
go
before.
right into your local township assessor. It'll vary by where you are, but I know Schaumburg's great. I know Barrington's great. Palatine, this is the area I've worked and lived in the most. So I know those townships are spectacular. You go in there, they'll help you. And here's what I say to that. That's a great thing to do, but don't forget you can appeal more than once a year. And if you're not successful, you can keep appealing. And the only thing I say is don't get satisfied if you really think your assessment's wrong and you find this and they get you a reduction that equates to a $400 reduction. Don't be satisfied with just that. You can always push and ensure, that the case is fully resolved. But yeah, the township assessor is a spectacular resource, especially in most Cook and the Collier County, mostly Cook County. The Collier counties typically are less helpful, but there are still several of them that will happily help you. And some of them actually just put all their data online in super easy ways to access as well. So
and then there's if you want to find out what houses are selling in your neighborhood, you can download either realtor.com or redfin.com to your phone, literally stand in your yard and say, hey, I want to see all the homes that are closed near me. You can do that on the app and then click on the homes. If it's your model in that subdivision or something at least comparable, and you're starting to see prices that are less than your own assessed value, you start writing those numbers down, write down the addresses,
and then look
prices.
up the properties later, and then look up the properties on the assessor, make sure those facts match, because I will say when you're doing that, oftentimes Realtor and Zillow, Trulia, all those websites, Redfin, sometimes they can have factual mistakes on their stuff. Realtors will put in below grade square footage often into the full square footage of the house. And so you can be like, oh, this says it's a 4,000 square foot house that sold for X amount. That's a great price. I should use that. You go to the assessor, says, no, it's a 2,100 square foot house with a 1,900 square foot basement. And then it's suddenly not a good comp anymore. So it's important to note those. And I say that because I've had many clients who say they've used the market to appeal. I had one client come to me, showed me his case that he made, and he made a case that patted the assessor on the back, which was his case basically said, great job. You've done a great job assessing my property. He just didn't realize it. So it's important to note that. And again, the assessor can help you pull comps, and they'll help you get appeals. Basically, they'll help you with the forms. They'll help you with all that. And obviously I can help you as well if you don't want to deal with any of that.
Absolutely.
And then someone asked about
Catherine asked for clarification. Did you say bi-level, quad, tri-level are included in square foot?
So it's really anything. It's above grade versus below grade. That's the clarification. So above grade, square foot, above ground, anything where like if you're on a split level house and you have a tri-level, so you go in, you have a main floor, you go upstairs and you go downstairs. The downstairs is likely below grade square footage and not counted in it shouldn't be counted in your square footage. And sometimes you kind of the quad where you go in on the front floor, you go down, then you go down to a basement and you go upstairs into the fourth floor. Again, anything below grade shouldn't be counted in your square footage. That's the it. Now, here's the why appeal your taxes. These are actual decisions that I have obtained for my clients. And sometimes you can get small reductions, sometimes you can get big reductions, but these are just actual decisions that you get when you submit an appeal. And you can see there's a before and an after each one of these. The clients saw a reduction in their taxes. Some of them may only have been a couple $100. And I might not have stopped with those appeals, and I might have appealed them to the state of Illinois. Those appeals can take a long time, but again, it's important to just appeal if there is a valid case. These are examples of decisions. Now, those decisions are talking about property values. What does that mean for the actual tax bills? Here are 4 examples of clients this year who appealed. I appealed with them, and these are reductions that they saw. The left is the 2021 tax bill and the right is their 2020 tax bill. And this is just 4 separate clients. So the top one in 2020, they paid over $8,000. And then in 2021, their tax bill was $6,600. They saw an 18.5% reduction, even though their assessment was slated to go up. This next client, they saw a 31.5% reduction, $3,000 down from $9,300 to $6,300. The next one was a smaller reduction, but still substantial. It was a 10% reduction on a $12,500 tax bill. They saved over $1,000 on that one. And the final one on that screen there is a client where we were able to cut their taxes by almost half, going from over $10,000 to just over $5,000. And again, there are a lot of examples like this, and this is what can happen if you actually appeal. And I point out the decreases. If you look at those columns, the numbers on the right, there's a percentage below each tax bill, and that percentage is the increase or decrease from the prior year. And you'll note that all of them increased from their prior year, and then after I appealed, every single one of them decreased significantly instead of increasing again, as is the typical tendency. So appealing your taxes can make a significant difference, and it is an important thing to keep in mind. People ask me all the time when to appeal your taxes, and that varies wildly by township. So it depends on what county you're in and what township you're in. The Cook County assessor has a formal appeal level. All the other counties have some formal, some informal, some not at all assessment appeal levels. Every county has the Board of Review. That is an important thing to note, because if you appeal at the Board of Review and you're not satisfied, then you can appeal to the final one, the Property Tax Appeal Board of Illinois, the state level. But you cannot appeal to that state unless you have appealed at your Board of Review. And again, here's right now, this is the Cook County assessor. They just updated their website a couple days ago, and they're planning to roll out their 2022 assessment calendar. It's not out there yet, but we should get dates in the coming weeks. And usually they try to, once they have a better handle on things, they put up estimates as well. This is for Lake County. The entire Lake County is already calendared with tentative dates. And that's coming up in August and September are your final deadlines for all of Lake County. Kane County is already appealing. You're going to have deadlines from July through October probably, but this is Kane County's already moving with 3 deadlines coming up in the next couple weeks. McHenry County is the same way as well. So keep that in mind. Now, I've mentioned the Property Tax Appeal Board, the final level there. Unfortunately, the state level takes a significant amount of time. And because those reductions are decided after the fact, you've already paid your tax bill at that point. So what happens is it takes anywhere from 18 to 48 months. I have clients, just 6 months ago, I received checks for appeals that were filed for 2017 assessments. Okay, so I was just trying to keep that in perspective. my clients got refunds for 2017 appeals in 2021. And that can go faster in the collar counties. They're a little bit less behind. However, Cook County is, again, there's as many properties in Cook County as there are in the rest of the state combined almost. So Cook County, it gets a bit backlogged, and they're the ones that are running 3 or 4 years behind. But when you do get a reduction here, they actually send you money. So these are just literally examples of clients that received refund checks. And this is 3 checks. These clients, each one got over $1,000. One of them got $2,700. And these are just refunded to the client. They come into the mail care of me, and then I can make sure I get my fee, and then I send my clients money. And I love writing my clients checks. So it's the most fun time, but it can take a long time. Like I said, those checks were all cut in December, but they were for 2017 appeals, and that was literally 6 months ago. So it's a slow process, but nobody minds getting a bunch of money a couple years later. And this can, even if you sell the house, if you have an appeal pending, like many of these clients, actually, I think that top check, I still haven't contacted that client because they moved and their phone number no longer works. And so I have their money and I can't give it to them because they haven't responded to me. But they sold their house and they still get that's still their money because they're the one who paid those taxes. That's pretty much kind of the introduction to an overview for property taxes. I know I throw a lot of information out and I talk very quickly, and I am happy to have conversations with anyone at all, answer questions, see if we can appeal for your taxes or any of that sort of stuff. So
Hey,
just let
Ryan,
me know.
I want you, so there's 2 things that I want to do. Eventually, I'm going to hijack your screen, but you can leave this up for a second because I've got some images that I want to show some people on the properties. Seems like there was a lot of question about buy levels, try levels, whatever. So found a couple images online.
Awesome.
That we'll be able to share in a second. But I want you to, if you can, walk me through a process. So, okay, real estate agent is meeting with a potential seller. Again, she looks at the property taxes, and when they were doing their comps, they noticed, hey, something's off. These taxes are 7,000. Everything else that I was using as comparables to establish how much I might list this home for, those property taxes were 4,800 to 5,000. So this property significantly overtaxed from what I can tell. If an agent determines that as their, and more importantly, could they even use this as part of their listing presentation? How would they go about engaging your services, and what would that look like in the way of being able to provide a smaller tax credit when in fact, hey, these houses right now, they're listing and selling and it's moving very fast. What you're telling me, maybe the appeals process takes a little bit longer. So just walk me through that, if you would, how we could help a real estate agent who is making that presentation show a different way that they could save the client money, and B, maybe just show the seller how they could save money. If you could walk me through that, I'd appreciate it.
So typically when there's a situation like that, if it's truly just out of whack, it's one of 2 things. There are exemptions missing, most often homestead exemption, and you're comparing to something like a bunch of seniors who may have a little bit extra exemption. That can happen very often because you can see a $2,000 difference if you compare it to 4 people who are seniors and you don't have a homestead. That's a great thing. That's an oftentimes what shows that tax bill difference. And what I say is just call me and ask. I'm happy to talk to anyone up front, and I don't charge for that. And the way I work with people like that is I do an analysis. I see, first off, are all their exemptions in place? Are their characteristics correct? And then if either one of those can be corrected, we correct those because those will typically immediately happen. If you're in DuPage County, no exemptions, we call them up like right now. And this I say until about September. Once you've paid that second installment, it's hard to get money back from them. But for the next 2 months or so, we can immediately correct those in any of the collar counties, get that exemption applied, and then or square footage corrected, possibly get certificates of error issued, and that can all happen immediately. Or I've had a client, and I was just trying to see if I could pull up an example, but I had a client come to me. They were having issues selling their house. This was a high-end home, but they were having issues selling their house because their tax bill was so huge and completely out of whack. They had it listed. The broker came to me. Finally, they got connected with me. I talked to them. We looked at it. We submitted the appeal, and they actually, by the time the appeal had been submitted, they'd actually sold the house, but they'd sold the house pursuant to my appeal. And the person had ended up escrowing all the taxes that they would have normally prorated, because we knew it was under appeal and we knew we were going to be successful. And what we ended up doing was holding all that money back from the seller's closing. So they didn't pay it. They set it aside with their attorney. And then when the reduction got reflected, and it just got reflected a month and a half ago, when that bill came out in May. So this is still an ongoing thing, but that client, then that person has all their money, their tax bill dropped. This case was, again, high-end home. It was a significant reduction. We dropped their tax bill over $12,000. And that person, that seller, because they had engaged my services prior to listing and prior to selling, and their attorney that they were working with did everything correctly, that seller is now able to get the benefit of that tax appeal that took a year after the results of which took a year to see after they sold. And they're now getting the benefit of that appeal because they talked to me right away and everything kind of lined up. Sometimes it doesn't happen. Sometimes people will call me and the deadline to appeal is already passed and there's nothing I can do. But yeah, if everyone pays attention, it worked out very well, because not only did the seller get all of their money, the buyer now enjoys a significantly lower tax bill going forward.
I was just going to say that.
It's just a huge win for everyone, especially on that property. Again, that was a property where the tax bill went from $37,000 to $25,000. Very nice single family home, obviously in the seven figures. It's a different world, but some of those, you saw some of those bills on some of those other properties. Those were, you could get $3,000-$4,000 on a $10,000 bill, and that's obviously significant. And that's really what I say is, if there's questions, if things seem out of place, call me, text me, email me. Any of those things are fine, and I'm happy to answer all those questions.
So I hijacked the screen because we're coming into an end here. By the way, you already got some compliments in the chat, but I just wanted to, everybody could see this is a raised ranch. And the issue is, on the surface, it looks like, hey, what do you mean below grade, Rich? Well, I don't know if you guys can see my mouse, but if you look basically to the left of the garage door and you see the dirt coming up about mid-level of the garage door, that means that entire lower level is below grade. So really, the only thing that should be counted is where those windows are up on the top floor. Here's a better picture. Here we go. You guys are looking at it, which this would be more of a bi-level or tri-level. So this level here, that's actually below the grass, that should never be part of your square footage. So
and then the quad level is that picture on the top there is just where you have that extra basement below the garage or something like that. You know, that's that is the same thing. Anything like that, below grade, basement level, even halfway, that should not be included in your above ground square footage.
So this lower level, but this is a good picture that I was able to find too. So anything below grade, not in the square footage, ultimately should never be in the square footage in the listing sheet, but you see it all the time, unfortunately. But where the big, and that can lead to some appraisal problems, but we're not talking about that today. The bigger issue is really what we're talking about as far as property taxes. So if anybody has any questions, fire them out to us. Otherwise, we've got some classes coming up next month. I've got a couple things coming up next month. We've got a class on July 9th, which is going to be our home buyer class. So if you know of anybody thinking about buying a home, July 9th, which is a Saturday from 9 to 10, we're going to be talking about home buying class. There's a link actually in the chat. Thank you, Tony. right after that, I'm planning on not really having a voice that day because I'm going to go into another class about 15 minutes after that. And we call that our personal budget class. So that's a class where we actually show you how to use a form. In the form, show you how to track income, track expenses, and more importantly, how to build wealth by eliminating debt, starting to track your savings. It's a form my wife and I have used for 6 years, and it's a game changer. It's super, super helpful for just having a budget. If one person in your house pays the bills and the other doesn't, you could use the form. The person that pays them can use the form and then walk over to the person that doesn't and say, hey, just so you know, this is what's going on with our money. This is where we're at. And there's two advantages to that. Number one, of course, one of the biggest reasons for divorce is money. So why not have everybody on the same page, literally, when we talk about a budget? And the other thing, if something happens to that person that is paying the bills, the person that wasn't paying the bills at least has some form of reference to what the heck is going on in the house. So there's a lot of good things about those two classes. Those are going to be both on July 9th. And we are going to have a customer appreciation picnic on looking at my calendar, July 30th. And if you're interested in that, you could reach out. We've got a grove rented over here at Elk Grove Village. Ryan, you and your kids are invited. We got a pizza food truck coming. So you guys come check that out. Reach out to me for more information there. Thank you, Denise. Thank you, Marie, for the kind words. And Ryan, thank you very much for crushing the presentation as always. Hopefully some folks will use you as a reference and a resource, because I think you're a great resource for us. Tony, always, thank you very much for putting this on for us and making me look great. So thank you guys for everything. Have a enjoyable weekend, and we'll talk soon. Hopefully see you soon. Bye, guys.
Thank you. Bye.